The Ferrari's engine ticked in the silence like a countdown. Marco stood in front of it, grease already smeared across his torn sleeve, his hands trembling not from fear but from the weight of every eye in the parking lot burning into his back. The millionaire leaned against the driver's door, arms crossed, a smile carved into his face like something rehearsed in a mirror. His name was Vincent Cross, and he wore wealth the way other men wore cologne, heavy, obvious, suffocating. He tilted his head, sunglasses catching the afternoon glare, and said it again, louder this time, so the small crowd gathering near the cafe tables could hear. "Fix my car, kid, right here, right now. If you can get her running in 5 minutes, she's yours." Laughter rippled through the onlookers. Someone whispered. Someone else pulled out a phone. Marco didn't move. His sneakers, held together with duct tape, looked like they might fall apart if he took a single step. He was 14 years old. His jeans were stiff with old dirt. His t-shirt had a bleach stain across the chest in the shape of a handprint, like someone had tried to erase him and given up halfway. He looked at the car, then at Vincent, then at the ground. Vincent pushed off the Ferrari and walked a slow circle around Marco, close enough that the boy could smell his cologne now, something sharp and expensive that made the air feel thinner. The scent reminded Marco of the men who used to come into his father's garage, the ones who'd complain about a scratch smaller than a fingernail, who'd talk on their phones while his father explained what was wrong, who'd question the bill even though the labor was fair. His father used to say those men didn't understand the value of work because they'd never done any. Marco understood now what he meant. "What's wrong?" Vincent said, voice dripping with amusement. "Thought you were some kind of genius, thought you knew cars. That's what you told my driver, wasn't it? When you were begging for work outside my dealership last week?" Marco's jaw tightened. He had said that. He had been holding a sign, cardboard, Sharpie, the letters crooked because his hands had been shaking from the cold. "We'll work for food. Good with ENGINES." And Vincent's driver had laughed, taken a picture, and driven off. But Vincent had seen it, remembered it. And now here they were, in this parking lot outside an upscale cafe, where a single sandwich cost more than Marco usually spent on food in a week. The cafe was called Meridian, all glass walls and modern furniture, the kind of place where people came to be seen rather than to eat. The parking lot was half full with expensive cars, a Mercedes, 2 BMWs, a Porsche, and Vincent's Ferrari, red like fresh blood, gleaming under the afternoon sun. The crowd gathering around them was growing, women in yoga pants holding iced lattes, men in business casual checking their watches, a couple of teenagers filming on their phones. They all had the same expression, curious, entertained, waiting for the punchline. "I'll do it," Marco said quietly. Vincent's smile widened. "What was that?" "I said I'll do it." The crowd leaned in. Someone near the back said, "This is gonna be good." Someone else laughed. Vincent clapped his hands together once, sharp like a starting gun. "Outstanding. Clock's ticking, grease monkey. 5 minutes, not a second more." Marco moved toward the car. His backpack was on the ground a few feet away, next to his father's old toolbox. The toolbox was metal, navy blue, scratched and dented from years of use. His father's initials were still visible on the top, painted in white, R.A. Roberto Alvarez. Marco had carried that toolbox with him every single day since his father died. It was the only thing he had left that still smelled like him, like motor oil and Old Spice, and the cheap cigars he used to smoke on Sunday afternoons. Marco knelt beside the toolbox and opened it. The hinges creaked. Inside were the tools his father had collected over 30 years. Some of them were older than Marco. A socket wrench with electrical tape around the handle, a set of screwdrivers with worn rubber grips, needle nose pliers, a torque wrench, a compression tester. Everything organized, everything clean, because his father had taught him that a mechanic's tools were sacred. You take care of them, they take care of you. His hands were shaking harder now. Not from nerves, from hunger. He hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, a sleeve of crackers stolen from a gas station on 5th Street. His stomach felt like it was eating itself. His head was light, floaty, like he might tip over if he stood up too fast. But his mind was clear. It always was when he worked. The hunger disappeared, the cold disappeared. Everything disappeared except the engine and the problem and the solution waiting to be found. He stood, tools in hand, and walked to the front of the Ferrari. The car was beautiful, obscene. A 488 JTB, maybe 2 years old, worth more than most people made in 5 years. Marco had seen cars like this before in magazines, on YouTube videos his father used to watch late at night when he couldn't sleep. His father used to pause the videos and point out details. See that intake? See the way the body curves? That's not just design, kiddo, that's engineering. That's art. Marco used to fall asleep to the sound of his father's voice explaining things, teaching him, giving him a language for the world that made sense when nothing else did. He popped the hood. The mechanism was smooth, expensive, perfect. The hood lifted with a soft hydraulic hiss, and Marco stared into the engine bay. It was beautiful, clean, expensive. And deliberately sabotaged. He saw it immediately. The fuel line had been pinched, not broken, pinched. Someone had done this on purpose and recently. The clamp was loose. The line kinked at an angle that would restrict flow but not cut it off completely. It was the kind of thing that would make the engine sputter, stall, refuse to start. The kind of thing a real mechanic would spot in seconds. Marco's stomach turned. This wasn't a test, it was a show. Vincent had set this up, staged it, probably the moment he saw Marco walking past the cafe with his toolbox slung over his shoulder. He'd probably told his driver to sabotage the car, to make it look broken, just so he could humiliate a kid in front of a crowd. The cruelty of it was breathtaking, not because it was violent. Because it was casual, because to Vincent this was entertainment. Marco took a breath. The air smelled like exhaust and expensive coffee and the faint sweetness of someone's perfume. He reached into his toolbox, pulled out a flathead screwdriver and a pair of needle-nose pliers and got to work. 30 seconds. The crowd was still laughing. Someone said, $5 says he doesn't even know where the engine is. Someone else said, look at his shoes. A woman's voice, bright and mocking. Oh my God, is that duct tape? More laughter. Vincent stood with his back to Marco now, playing to his audience, gesturing wildly as he told some story about a kid who once tried to wash his Lamborghini with dish soap. The laughter got louder. Marco ignored it. He loosened the clamp with the screwdriver, adjusted the line with the pliers. His hands moved fast, precise, muscle memory carved into bone. This was easy. Easier than most of the jobs he'd done in the last 3 months. Easier than fixing a busted transmission with no manual. Easier than rebuilding a carburetor with parts scavenged from a junkyard. This was nothing. 45 seconds. He tightened the clamp back into place, checked the connection, ran his fingers along the line to make sure there were no other kinks, no other problems. There weren't. It was a clean fix. Simple, fast, exactly the kind of thing his father would have done. Marco stood, wiped his palms on his jeans, leaving dark streaks across the denim. Walked to the driver's side door, which Vincent had left open, keys still in the ignition. The leather seat was soft, cool, perfect. Marco slid into it. For a moment he just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, feeling the weight of it, the balance. He'd never sat in a car this expensive, never even touched one. The dashboard was all digital, glowing red and white. The steering wheel was wrapped in leather so soft it felt like skin. Everything about it screamed money, power, control. He turned the key. The engine roared to life. The sound was like thunder, deep, powerful, flawless. The kind of sound that made people stop and turn. The kind of sound that said, I'm here, I'm alive. I'm worth something. Marco felt it vibrate through the seat, through his chest, through his bones. For a moment he forgot where he was, forgot the crowd, forgot Vincent. He just listened to the engine, felt it hum beneath him, and thought, Dad would have loved this. The laughter stopped. Marco stepped out of the car, closed the door gently, and stood there waiting. The crowd had gone quiet. Someone muttered, no way. Someone else said, did he actually? Vincent turned slowly, his smile faltering, confusion flickering across his face like a bulb about to burn out. He stared at the car like it had betrayed him, like it had chosen the wrong side. You, Vincent's voice was thin now, uncertain. You actually. It's mine now, Marco said. The words hung in the air like smoke. Vincent blinked, then he laughed. It was forced, bitter, sharp at the edges. The kind of laugh people use when they're trying to convince themselves they're still in control. You're joking. You said if I fixed it, it's mine. I was making a point, kid, a joke. You think I'm just going to hand you a $300,000 car because you tweaked a fuel line? Marco didn't respond. He just stood there looking at Vincent with eyes that had seen too much too soon. Eyes that didn't beg, Didn't plead, just waited. His father used to say that silence was a kind of power. That sometimes the best thing you could do was nothing. Just stand your ground and let the other person show you who they really are. Vincent stepped closer, his voice dropping to something meant only for Marco. Close enough that Marco could see the pores on his nose, the vein pulsing in his temple, the way his hands were clenched so tight the knuckles had gone white. Listen to me, you little street rat. I don't know what kind of fantasy you're living in, but you're not walking away with my car. You're not walking away with anything. Now get out of here before I call the cops and tell them you tried to steal it. Marco's heart was pounding. He could feel it in his throat, behind his eyes, in his fingertips. Fear was creeping in now, cold and familiar. He'd felt this before, when the landlord had come to kick him out, when the social worker had looked at him like he was a problem to be solved. When he'd woken up in the storage unit at 3 in the morning, shivering, wondering if this was it, if this was how his life was going to be forever. Fear was an old friend, but so was stubbornness. His father used to say Marco was the most stubborn kid he'd ever met, said it ran in the family, said it was the only reason they'd survived as long as they had. Mr. Cross, the voice came from behind them, calm and cold. Vincent froze. Marco turned. A man in a gray suit stood near the cafe entrance, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. He was older, maybe 60, with silver hair combed back and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His tie was perfectly knotted, dark blue with thin silver stripes. He didn't raise his voice, but everyone heard him. The crowd parted slightly, instinctively, like they recognized authority even if they didn't know his name. "Is there a problem?" the man asked. Vincent's face shifted. The arrogance drained out of it like air from a punctured tire. He straightened, forced a smile, and turned. "Mr. Brennan, I didn't realize you were here." Brennan. The name moved through the crowd like a current. Marco didn't know who he was, but he could feel the weight of it. The way people stepped back, the way their voices dropped. The way Vincent's entire posture had changed. He looked smaller now, nervous, like a kid caught doing something he wasn't supposed to. "I was having lunch," Brennan said, stepping forward slowly, his eyes moving from Vincent to Marco and back again. His voice was measured, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to command attention. "And I couldn't help but overhear your arrangement." Vincent laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Wrong, like a recording played at the wrong speed. Just a bit of fun, sir. The kid said he could fix cars, so I gave him a little challenge. Harmless." Brennan's gaze shifted to Marco. He studied him for a long moment, took in the duct-taped shoes, the stained shirt, the toolbox sitting in the dirt, the grease on his hands under his fingernails smeared across his cheek. Marco felt exposed under that gaze, like Brennan could see through him, past the dirt and the hunger and the fear, straight down to something Marco wasn't even sure existed anymore. Then Brennan looked back at Vincent. "You offered him the car if he fixed it." "Well, yes, and he fixed it." Vincent hesitated. His eyes darted to the crowd, looking for support, for someone to back him up. But everyone was watching Brennan now. Everyone was waiting. It was a figure of speech. Was it? The question was quiet, but it cut through every excuse Vincent had been building. Brennan took another step forward, close enough now that Vincent had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. He was taller than Vincent, broader, and he carried himself with the kind of confidence that didn't need to prove anything. "Because from where I was sitting, Mr. Cross, it sounded like a contract." Verbal, yes, but witnessed by? He glanced around at the crowd, which had swelled to nearly 30 people now, all of them silent, all of them watching. Phones were still out, recording. Quite a few people. Vincent's face went red. The veins in his neck stood out. His hands curled into fists at his sides, and for a moment Marco thought he might actually swing. But he didn't. He just stood there shaking, his carefully constructed image cracking in real time. "Mr. Brennan, with all due respect, I'm not going to let some homeless kid drive off in my Ferrari because of a joke." "Then you shouldn't have made the offer." The air went still. Vincent opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. He looked like a fish pulled from water, gasping, desperate. Brennan didn't move, didn't blink, just waited. "This is ridiculous," Vincent finally said, his voice rising. "You can't be serious. You can't possibly expect me to." "I expect you to honor your word," Brennan said. "Something I thought you understood, given your position in this industry." The threat was implicit but clear. Vincent's dealership wasn't independent. He leased the property. He bought inventory from suppliers. He relied on relationships, on reputation, on the goodwill of people more powerful than him. And Brennan, apparently, was one of those people. Vincent's jaw worked. His eyes were wild now, darting between Brennan and Marco and the crowd. He was trapped, and he knew it. Brennan turned to Marco. "What's your name, son?" "Marco." "Marco what?" "Alvarez." Brennan nodded slowly. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened, just slightly, just enough. "Do you have a driver's license, Marco?" "No, sir." "Then you can't drive the car." Marco's heart sank. He'd known it was too good to be true. He looked down at his shoes, at the duct tape peeling away from the rubber, and felt the shame crawling up his spine again. The same shame he felt every time someone looked at him like he was less than nothing, like he didn't belong, like he should just disappear. But Brennan continued, "You can own it." Marco's head snapped up. Brennan reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, held it out between two fingers. Marco took it with shaking hands. The card was thick, expensive, embossed letters that caught the light. BRNNAN Automotive Group. CEO, below that a phone number and an address. "I own 43 dealerships across the state," Brennan said. "And I'm always looking for people who know what they're doing under the hood. You fixed that car in under a minute. I watched you. You didn't guess, you didn't fumble. You knew exactly what was wrong and you fixed it. That's rare, especially in someone your age." Marco couldn't speak. His throat had closed up. His eyes were burning. He blinked hard, trying to keep the tears back, but they were coming whether he wanted them to or not. Brennan looked at Vincent. "Transfer the title." "Today," Vincent's voice cracked, "you can't be serious." "I'm very serious. You made a public offer. He fulfilled the terms. And now you're going to honor it. Or I'm going to make some calls and ensure that every dealership, every garage, every auto group in this city knows that Vincent Cross is a man who lies to children for entertainment." The threat was delivered without malice, just cold fact. No anger, no emotion, just consequence. Vincent looked around, searching for an ally, for someone to tell him this wasn't happening, but the crowd was stone-faced. A few people were filming now, phones held high. One woman had her hand over her mouth, eyes shining with tears. A man in a business suit was nodding slowly, like he'd just seen something important. Vincent's shoulders slumped. "Fine," he muttered. "I'm sorry," Brennan said. "I said fine, I'll transfer it." Brennan didn't smile, he just nodded, then he turned back to Marco. "The car's going to be kept in a secure garage under my company's name until you're old enough to drive it legally. In the meantime, I'm offering you a job, apprentice mechanic, paid. Full-time if you want it, part-time if you're still in school, room and board included if you need it." Marco's vision blurred. The tears came fast now, hot and unstoppable, spilling down his cheeks before he could wipe them away. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a broken sound, half sob, half laugh. He wiped at his face with the back of his hand, smearing grease across his cheeks, across his forehead, and nodded. "Okay," he whispered. Brennan placed a hand on his shoulder, firm and steady. The weight of it was grounding, real. "Come by my office tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, bring your tools." Marco nodded again, unable to form words. Brennan gave him one last look, something almost resembling a smile, and then turned and walked back toward the cafe. The crowd parted for him like water. Vincent stood frozen, staring at the Ferrari like it was a corpse. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. No one spoke to him. No one looked at him. He pulled out his phone, made a call, his voice low and urgent. Then he got into a black sedan parked a few spaces down and drove away without another word. The crowd began to disperse slowly, murmuring, some of them stopping to look at Marco, a few even nodding in approval. One older man, wearing a faded veteran's cap and a jacket with patches from the Gulf War, walked up and shook Marco's hand. Didn't say anything. Just shook it firm and slow, his eyes wet, and walked away. A woman with gray hair and kind eyes pressed a $20 bill into Marco's palm. "Go get yourself something to eat, honey," she said. Marco tried to refuse, but she closed his fingers around the bill and walked away before he could argue. He stood there in the parking lot, the Ferrari still running behind him, the sound of it like a heartbeat, steady and strong. People were still watching, still filming. Someone would probably post this online. It would go viral, maybe. Or maybe it would disappear into the noise of the internet, forgotten by tomorrow. Marco didn't care. He didn't need the world to see this. He just needed it to be real. He turned off the engine, closed the hood, packed his tools back into his father's toolbox carefully the way he'd been taught. Then he picked up his backpack, slung the toolbox over his shoulder, and walked toward the bus stop. His legs felt weak, his head was spinning. But he walked straight, shoulders back, because his father had always told him to walk like he belonged, even when he didn't feel like he did. The bus ride back across town took 40 minutes. Marco sat in the back, staring out the window, watching the city slide past. The rich neighborhoods gave way to middle-class suburbs, then to industrial zones, then to the South End where he'd grown up, where his father had worked, where everything had fallen apart. He got off at his stop, a corner near the old grocery store that had closed down last year, and walked 3 blocks to the storage facility. It was called Secure Lock Storage, a squat concrete building surrounded by chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. The paint was peeling, the asphalt was cracked. There was graffiti on the side wall, tags and symbols Marco didn't understand. He'd been living here for 3 months, 3 months since his father died. 3 months since the world had turned upside down and dumped him out into the cold. Marco had the code to the front gate. He punched it in, slipped inside, and walked down the rows of orange metal doors until he reached Unit 127, his home. He unlocked the padlock, rolled up the door with a screech of metal on metal, and stepped inside. The unit was 10 feet by 10 feet, concrete floor, metal walls, no windows, no heat. No light except for the battery-powered lantern he'd bought at a dollar store. His sleeping bag was rolled up in the corner, the fabric faded and torn in places. His backpack with his clothes sat next to it. A plastic crate held some books, a notebook, pens, a jug of water, a box of granola bars half empty. This was everything he owned. Everything he had left. 3 months ago, Marco's life had been different, not easy, never easy, but different. He'd lived with his father in a small apartment on the south side, a 2-bedroom walk-up on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like cooking oil and cigarette smoke. The wallpaper was peeling. The carpet was stained. The pipes rattled when you turned on the water, but it was home. His father had worked at Rodriguez Auto Repair, a small garage tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop on 7th Street. He'd worked there for 15 years, 6 days a week, sometimes 7 when money was tight. He'd come home every night smelling like motor oil and sweat, his hands permanently stained, his back always hurting. But he never complained. He'd just kiss Marco on the head, ask about school, and make them dinner. Usually something simple: spaghetti, rice and beans, grilled cheese. They'd eat together at the small kitchen table, the TV playing in the background, and his father would tell him about the cars he'd worked on that day. "Fixed a '67 Mustang today," he'd say, eyes lighting up. "Classic, beautiful machine. Owner didn't know what he had, treated her like trash, but we got her running again." Sounded like music, kiddo. Marco would listen, absorbing every word, every detail. His father had started teaching him about cars when he was 7. They'd spend weekends in the garage, his father explaining how engines worked, how to diagnose problems, how to fix them. Marco had learned to change oil before he learned algebra. He'd learned to replace brake pads before he learned about the Revolutionary War. "Engines are honest," his father used to say. "They don't lie, they don't play games. Something's wrong, they tell you, you just have to learn how to listen." Marco had learned. He'd learned so well that by the time he was 12, he could diagnose most problems just by listening to an engine run. By 13, he could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded. His father used to brag about him to the other mechanics, called him a prodigy, said he was going to be something special. Then his father's heart stopped. It happened on a Wednesday. Marco had been at school, sitting in English class, reading To Kill a Mockingbird and thinking about nothing in particular. The intercom crackled. "Marco Alvarez, please come to the office." Everyone had turned to look at him. He'd felt his stomach drop the way it always did when something was wrong. The principal had been there. So had a woman from social services, a stranger with tired eyes and a manila folder. They'd told him gently, carefully, the way people tell you things they know will break you. Heart attack. Instantaneous, he didn't suffer, like that made it better. Like knowing his father died quickly made the fact that he was gone any easier to swallow. Marco had nodded, said okay, asked if he could go. They'd tried to keep him there, tried to talk about arrangements, about where he'd go, what would happen next. But Marco had just walked out, walked all the way home. Walked into the apartment that still smelled like his father's aftershave, sat on the couch, and waited for him to come home. He never did. The landlord had given him 2 weeks. The building owner was sympathetic, but not that sympathetic. No income meant no rent. No rent meant eviction, simple as that. Social services had tried to place him. There was a woman named Diane, soft-spoken and kind, who'd shown up with more folders, more forms. Foster care, she'd said, just temporary. Just until we can find a relative, a guardian, someone. But there was no one. Marco's mother had left when he was 3. No siblings, his father's parents were dead. No aunts, no uncles, no cousins that anyone knew about, just Marco, alone. The foster system was full, overcrowded. They'd put him on a waiting list, told him to stay with a friend, with a neighbor, with anyone while they sorted things out. But Marco didn't have friends like that. He was quiet at school, kept to himself. And his neighbors were just as poor as he was. They couldn't take in another mouth to feed, so Marco had left. He'd packed a backpack with clothes, grabbed his father's toolbox, and walked out of the apartment for the last time. He'd found the storage facility on Craigslist. $40 a month for a 10x10 unit. He'd had $60 saved up from birthdays, from the occasional odd job. He'd paid for the first month, moved in, and disappeared. For 3 months, he'd survived. He showered at the rec center on 9th Street, the one with the community pool and basketball courts. He told the staff he was on the swim team. They never checked. He ate what he could. Granola bars from the dollar store, apples stolen from the grocery store when no one was looking. Sometimes he'd go to the Salvation Army, stand in line with the homeless men and women and get a hot meal. Nobody asked questions. Nobody cared. He'd tried to find work, real work. He'd walked into every garage, every shop, every dealership he could find, carrying his father's toolbox, offering to work for cheap, for free, for anything. Most places turned him away immediately. A few let him prove himself, let him fix something small, then paid him cash and sent him on his way. $20 here, 30 there, never enough, never steady. A week ago, he'd been outside Vincent Cross's dealership, Cross Luxury Automotive. A sprawling lot full of Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Porsches, McLarens. Cars that cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Marco had been holding his cardboard sign, the one he'd made the night before, hoping maybe someone would see value in a kid who knew his way around an engine. Vincent's driver had seen him, laughed. Taken a picture, driven off. But Vincent had seen too, and Vincent had remembered. Now Marco sat in his storage unit, staring at the business card Brennan had given him, and wondered if this was real. If tomorrow morning he'd wake up and find out it was all a dream. If he'd show up at that office and they'd turn him away, tell him there'd been a mistake, tell him to go back to whatever hole he'd crawled out of. But the card was real. The weight of it in his hands, the embossed letters, the way Brennan had looked at him like he was worth something. Marco set the card down carefully on top of his father's toolbox. Then he lay back on his sleeping bag, fully clothed, and stared at the metal ceiling. He thought about his father, about the way he used to say, "You're gonna be something, kiddo." Something real, about the way he'd believed it even when Marco didn't. "I'm trying, Dad," Marco whispered into the darkness. "I'm really trying." He didn't sleep much that night. He couldn't. His mind kept racing, replaying the scene in the parking lot, Vincent's face, Brennan's voice, the feel of the Ferrari's steering wheel under his hands. He kept thinking about all the ways it could have gone wrong, all the ways it still might. At 6 in the morning, he gave up trying to sleep. He got up, changed into the cleanest clothes he had, a pair of jeans with fewer stains, a black t-shirt that wasn't too wrinkled, and used a bottle of water to wash his face and hands. He scrubbed the grease from under his nails, combed his hair with his fingers, and stared at himself in the cracked mirror he'd propped against the wall. He looked tired, thin. His cheekbones were too sharp, his eyes were sunken. He looked like exactly what he was, a homeless kid trying to survive. But there was something else there too. Something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, determination, hope. He picked up his toolbox and his backpack and left the storage unit, locking it behind him. The bus didn't start running until 7, so he walked. Walked through the empty streets, past the closed shops and dark windows, toward the north side of the city where people like Brennan lived and worked. It took him 2 hours. By the time he reached the Brennan Automotive Group headquarters, his feet were aching, and he was sweating despite the cool morning air. The building was glass and steel, modern and gleaming in the early light. The parking lot was mostly empty, a few expensive cars scattered here and there. Marco stood outside, staring up at it, his heart pounding. This was it. This was the moment that would decide everything. He walked through the front doors. The lobby was huge. Marble floors that gleamed like ice. High ceilings with recessed lighting. A reception desk with a woman in a crisp white blouse sitting behind it, typing on a computer. She looked up as Marco approached, her expression shifting from professional to confused to something like pity. Marco was used to that look. He ignored it. "I'm here to see Mr. Brennan," he said. "Do you have an appointment? He told me to come at 8. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 7:53, then back at Marco, at his clothes, at the toolbox. At the way his sneakers were held together with duct tape. "Your name?" "Marco Alvarez." She typed something into her computer. Her eyebrows went up. "Oh, yes, he's expecting you. 3rd floor, take the elevator to your right. His assistant will meet you." Marco nodded, turned, and walked to the elevator. The doors opened with a soft chime. He stepped inside. The walls were mirrored, and he caught sight of himself again. He looked exactly like what he was. A kid from the streets, poor, dirty, out of place, but he was here. And that had to count for something. The elevator doors opened on the 3rd floor. A woman in her 30s was waiting, wearing a navy blazer and a kind smile. She had warm brown eyes and short hair styled professionally. "Marco?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm Jennifer, Mr. Brennan's assistant. He's ready for you." "Follow me." She led him down a hallway lined with framed photos. Cars, dealerships, people in suits shaking hands. Awards, plaques. Newspaper clippings with headlines like "Brennan Automotive expands to 40 locations" and "Local success story, from mechanic to mogul." The walls smelled like fresh paint and carpet cleaner. Everything was clean. Everything was perfect. Marco felt like he was tracking dirt with every step, even though he'd scrubbed his shoes as best he could. Jennifer stopped at a door at the end of the hall, knocked twice, and opened it. "Mr. Brennan, Marco's here." "Send him in." Marco stepped inside. The office was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. A desk the size of a dining table, made of dark wood polished to a shine. Bookshelves lined with technical manuals, binders, framed photos of Brennan with various people, politicians, business leaders, celebrities. And Brennan himself, sitting behind the desk in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed a document. He looked up as Marco entered, took off his glasses, and stood. "Marco, good morning, right on time, I like that." "Good morning, sir." Brennan gestured to a chair in front of the desk. Leather, high-backed, expensive. "Sit, please." Marco sat. The chair was soft, comfortable. He set his toolbox down beside him and folded his hands in his lap, unsure what to do with them. Brennan studied him for a moment, the same way he had in the parking lot, like he was looking for something, like he was making a decision. "I meant what I said yesterday," Brennan began, leaning back in his chair. "You have a gift. I've been in this business for 40 years. I started as a mechanic when I was 16, worked my way up, bought my first dealership when I was 30. I've seen thousands of mechanics, trained hundreds. And I can count on one hand the number of people I've met who have a natural understanding of engines the way you do. That's not something you can teach. You either have it or you don't." "You have it." Marco didn't know what to say. He just nodded, his throat tight. "But talent isn't enough," Brennan continued, his voice firm but not unkind. "Talent without discipline is wasted. Talent without structure, without education, without someone to guide it, it goes nowhere. I've seen it happen too many times. Brilliant kids who could have been great, but life got in the way. Poverty, bad influences, no support system. They end up working dead-end jobs or worse. I don't want that to happen to you." "It won't," Marco said quietly. "I'll do whatever it takes. I believe you, but I need you to understand what I'm offering here. This isn't charity, Marco. I don't do charity. This is an investment in you. And I expect a return on that investment. I expect hard work, dedication, commitment. I expect you to show up on time every time." I expect you to learn to grow to become the best version of yourself. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Because if you can't, if you're going to waste this opportunity, I need to know now. I'd rather help someone else, someone who wants it more. Marco met his eyes. I want it more than anything. I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired. I promise you that. Brennan studied him for a long moment, then he nodded. Good, here's how this is going to work. You'll start as an apprentice in one of my garages. It's about 20 minutes from here, South Side Industrial District. You'll work under a master mechanic named Luis Hernandez. He's been with me for 12 years. He's tough, he's demanding, but he's fair. And he's the best teacher I've ever met. He'll teach you everything you need to know about modern automotive systems. Diagnostics, repair, maintenance, everything. Marco nodded, absorbing every word. You'll be paid $15 an hour to start, Brennan continued. That's above minimum wage. I don't believe in paying people poverty wages and expecting excellence. You'll work 40 hours a week, but here's the catch. You're also going to enroll in school. Marco's eyes widened. School, there's a technical high school 2 blocks from the garage. Metro Tech. They specialize in automotive technology, engineering, skilled trades. You'll attend classes in the morning, 8 to noon. Then you'll work at the garage from 1 to 6. That gives you evenings to study, to rest, to take care of yourself. On weekends, you'll study. And if you keep your grades up, if you maintain at least a B average, if you show up on time and work hard, I'll pay for you to go to college when you graduate. Full ride. Engineering if that's what you want, or business, or anything else that interests you. Marco couldn't breathe. The room felt too small, too bright. This wasn't just a job, this was a life, a future. Everything he'd thought was gone forever, handed back to him like it had never left. As for living arrangements, Brennan said, his voice softening slightly, there's a small apartment above the garage. 1 bedroom, kitchenette, bathroom, nothing fancy. But it's clean, it's safe, and it's yours. Rent-free as long as you're working for me and going to school. The tears came before Marco could stop them. They spilled down his cheeks hot and fast, and he wiped at them frantically with the back of his hand, embarrassed, ashamed. I'm sorry, he choked out. I'm sorry, don't apologize, Brennan said quietly. He stood, walked around the desk, and sat on the edge of it, closer to Marco. I know what it's like to have nothing. I grew up in a trailer park in eastern Kentucky. My father was an alcoholic, violent, mean. My mother worked 3 jobs trying to keep food on the table. We had nothing, less than nothing. I put myself through community college fixing cars in a Walmart parking lot. $5 a job, 10 if it was something complicated. I slept in my car more nights than I can count. I know what hunger feels like. I know what it's like to wake up in the morning and wonder if today's the day you just give up. Marco looked up at him, tears still streaming. I know what it's like when people look at you and see nothing, Brennan continued. When they look past you, through you, like you're invisible, like you don't matter. So when I say I see you, Marco, I mean it. I see you. I see what you are right now, and I see what you can become. And I'm willing to bet on that, on you. Marco couldn't speak. He just nodded over and over, trying to convey everything he couldn't put into words. Brennan stood, walked back around the desk, and extended his hand. Marco stood too, wiped his eyes one more time, and took it. The handshake was firm, solid, a contract sealed not with paper, but with something more important. Trust, faith, hope. Welcome to Brennan Automotive Group, Brennan said. Thank you, Marco whispered. Thank you so much. Brennan released his hand and pressed a button on his phone. Jennifer, can you come in, please? The door opened, and Jennifer stepped inside. Yes, sir. Take Marco to the South Side garage, introduce him to Luis, get him set up in the apartment. And stop by Metro Tech on the way, get him enrolled for the fall semester. Of course, Jennifer smiled at Marco. Ready to go? Marco nodded. He picked up his toolbox and backpack and followed her out of the office. As they walked down the hallway, Jennifer made conversation, asking him questions about his background, his experience, what he liked to work on. Marco answered as best he could, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about his father, about how proud he would have been, about how he would have shaken Brennan's hand and said, "Thank you for seeing what I see in my boy." The garage was a 20-minute drive from headquarters. Jennifer drove a company car, a clean black SUV that smelled like leather and air freshener. She navigated through traffic expertly. talking the whole way about the company, about Brennan, about how he'd started with nothing and built an empire through hard work and treating people fairly. "He's a good man," she said as they pulled onto the highway. "Tough but fair. He expects a lot, but he gives a lot too. I've worked for him for 8 years, and I've never seen him screw anyone over. He takes care of his people." Marco nodded, staring out the window as the city passed by. The garage was in an industrial part of town, surrounded by warehouses and manufacturing plants. The building was large, concrete and steel, with 6 bay doors and a parking lot full of cars in various states of repair. A sign above the entrance read, "Brennan South Side Service Center." Jennifer pulled up to the front, parked, and turned off the engine. "This is it," she said with a smile. "Louis should be inside." "Good luck, Marco. You're going to do great." "Thank you." He got out, grabbed his toolbox and backpack, and walked toward the entrance. The garage smelled exactly the way his father's garage had smelled. Motor oil and rubber and coolant and exhaust. The smell hit him like a wave, and for a moment he was 12 years old again, standing next to his father, watching him work, listening to him explain how a transmission worked. He stepped inside. The garage was busy. Cars up on lifts, mechanics in coveralls working underneath them, the sound of air wrenches and impact drivers echoing through the space. And there, in the center of it all, was a man who had to be Louis. He was in his 50s, built like a bear, with broad shoulders and thick arms covered in faded tattoos. His hair was gray, pulled back in a ponytail, and he had a beard streaked with black. He was leaning over the engine of a Chevy Silverado, his hands deep in the engine bay. He looked up as Marco approached, wiped his hands on a rag, and walked over. "You Marco?" His voice was gruff, deep, with a slight accent. "Yes, sir." Louis looked him up and down, then glanced at the toolbox. His expression softened slightly. "That your dad's?" Marco nodded, unable to speak. "He teach you?" "Yes, sir," Louis grunted. "Brennan says you're good, says you fixed a Ferrari fuel line in under a minute." "Yes, sir." "We'll see." Louis crossed his arms. "I don't care who sent you, I don't care what Brennan says. In my garage, you prove yourself. You screw up, you're out. You show up late, you're out. You disrespect me or any of the other mechanics, you're out. You give me attitude, you're out." "Understood, understood." Louis stared at him for a long moment, his eyes hard, searching. Then he nodded. "Good, put your stuff in the locker room, back corner, through that door. There's an empty locker, number 7. Combinations 0001, change it to whatever you want. Then get back out here. We've got a Honda Civic with a busted alternator. Let's see what you can do." Marco followed his directions. The locker room was small, concrete floor, metal lockers lining the walls, a bench in the middle. It smelled like sweat and deodorant. He found locker number 7, opened it, and carefully placed his backpack inside. He kept the toolbox with him. That went wherever he went. When he came back out, Louis was waiting by the Honda, which was up on a lift. He handed Marco a work light and a socket wrench. "Show me." Marco set down his toolbox, grabbed the tools, and climbed under the car. The alternator was easy to spot. The belt was frayed, the pulley was loose, and the wiring was corroded. Standard wear and tear, maybe 80,000 miles on the vehicle. He called out what he saw as he worked, narrating the process the way his father had taught him. Identify the problem. Explain the solution. Execute cleanly. Louis listened, arms crossed, expression unreadable. When Marco finished, removing the old alternator, installing the new one, tightening everything down, checking the connections, he climbed out and stood, waiting for judgment. Louis walked over, climbed under the car himself, checked the work with his flashlight, tested the connections, gave the belt a tug. Then he climbed back out and nodded. "Not bad. Little slow, but the work is clean. Connections are tight. You'll get faster with practice." He tossed Marco the rag he'd been using. "Clean your tools, lock up your box. We've got 8 more cars today. You're gonna earn that 15 an hour." They worked until 6. Marco's hands were raw by the end of it, his back aching, his legs sore from standing and kneeling and climbing under cars all day. But he didn't complain. He just kept working, kept learning, kept proving that he belonged there. Louis was tough, just like Brennan had said. He didn't praise, he didn't coddle, but he taught. He showed Marco the right way to do things, the efficient way, the professional way. And when Marco made a mistake, over-tightening a bolt, forgetting to check a fluid level, Louis corrected him firmly but without anger. When the last car rolled out of the bay at 6:15, Lewis tossed him the rag again. Clean your tools, lock up your box, be back tomorrow at noon. You've got school in the morning, so don't stay up all night. Yes, sir. Lewis started to walk away, then stopped, turned back, looked at Marco for a long moment. You did good today, kid, real good. Your old man would be proud. Something cracked open in Marco's chest, a dam breaking. He nodded, unable to speak, and watched Lewis walk away toward the office. Marco cleaned his tools methodically, the way his father had taught him. Wiped them down, checked for damage, placed them back in their designated spots in the toolbox. When everything was clean and organized, he locked it up and headed for the stairs at the back of the garage that led to the apartment above. The apartment was exactly as Brennan had described. Small. Simple but clean and safe. The door had a real lock, not a padlock. Marco unlocked it and stepped inside. One main room with a bed against the wall, a dresser, a small table with 2 chairs. A kitchenette in the corner with a microwave, a hot plate, a mini fridge that hummed quietly. A door leading to a bathroom with a shower, toilet, and sink. The walls were white. The floors were laminate, slightly scuffed but clean. There was a window overlooking the parking lot, curtains drawn. It wasn't much, but it was his. Marco set his toolbox down by the bed and just stood there taking it in. A real bed with a mattress and sheets and a pillow. A real shower, a real kitchen, a real home. He walked to the bed and pressed his hand into the mattress, feeling the give, the softness. Then he sat down on the edge and just breathed. 2 days ago, he'd been sleeping on concrete in a storage unit. Now he was here. He stood and walked to the bathroom, turned on the shower. Hot water poured out immediately, steam rising. Marco stripped off his clothes, stepped under the spray, and stood there for what felt like hours. The water was hot. It didn't run out. He scrubbed himself with the bar of soap someone, probably Jennifer, had left on the shelf. Scrubbed until his skin was red, until every trace of grease and dirt and shame had washed away down the drain. When he finally got out, he dried off with the towel hanging on the rack and put on clean clothes from the bag Jennifer had left for him. Jeans that fit, a t-shirt without holes, socks, boxers. Everything new, everything clean. He went to the kitchenette and opened the fridge. It was stocked. Bread, deli meat, cheese, milk, juice, apples. Someone had thought of everything. Marco made himself a sandwich and sat at the table, eating slowly, savoring every bite. When he was done, he made another, and another. He hadn't realized how hungry he'd been until the food hit his stomach. That night, Marco lay in the real bed, under real sheets, staring at the ceiling. He thought about his father, about Vincent, about Brennan, about Lewis, about everything that had happened in the last 48 hours. It didn't feel real. It felt like a dream. He was going to wake up from any second, back in the storage unit, back in the cold. But the bed was real, the shower was real, the job was real. Tomorrow he'd wake up and it would all still be here. Marco closed his eyes and for the first time in 3 months, slept through the entire night without waking up once. The alarm went off at 6:30. Marco shot up, disoriented for a moment, wondering where he was. Then he remembered, the apartment, the job, the school. It was real. He got ready quickly, showered again just because he could, and walked the 2 blocks to Metro Tech. The school was a modern building, newer than his old high school, with clean hallways and classrooms equipped with actual tools and equipment. Jennifer had gotten him enrolled the day before, handled all the paperwork, gotten him a schedule. Automotive technology, mathematics, English, physics. The classes were smaller than he was used to. 15, maybe 20 students. Most of them were older, 16 or 17. They looked at him when he walked in, this skinny 14-year-old kid in clothes that were clean but clearly secondhand. But nobody said anything. The teacher, Mr. Patterson, a middle-aged man with grease permanently under his fingernails, just nodded at him and pointed to an empty seat. Marco sat, listened, took notes. The material was familiar. His father had taught him most of it already. But hearing it explained formally, with diagrams and technical terminology, made it click in new ways. At noon, he walked back to the garage. Lewis was waiting, hands on his hips. How was school? Good. Learn anything? Some, Lewis grunted. Good, let's see if you remember how to work. We've got a transmission rebuild waiting. And so it went. School in the morning, work in the afternoon, study in the evening, sleep, repeat, day after day, week after week. Marco fell into a rhythm. He was exhausted all the time. His body ached. His hands developed new calluses, but he didn't care. He was learning, growing, becoming something more than he'd been. Louis turned out to be an incredible teacher. Tough, yes, demanding, but patient when it mattered. He taught Marco how to read wiring diagrams, how to use diagnostic computers, how to troubleshoot problems that didn't have obvious solutions. He taught him about modern fuel injection systems, hybrid powertrains, computer-controlled transmissions, all the things that had evolved since his father's time, and Marco absorbed it all. Every lesson, every technique, every piece of knowledge. He stayed late most nights practicing on old engines Louis would bring in from junkyards. He read technical manuals in his apartment. Watched videos online. He became obsessed with learning, with improving, with proving himself. The other mechanics noticed. There were 4 of them at the South Side garage. Louis, a guy named Derek who specialized in electrical systems, a woman named Carmen who handled diagnostics, and an older man named Pete who'd been doing this for 30 years. At first, they'd been skeptical of Marco. This kid Brennan had dropped into their garage, some charity case who probably didn't know a spark plug from a lug nut. But Marco proved them wrong. Fast. By the end of the first month, he was handling jobs that apprentices twice his age couldn't touch. Complex electrical problems, difficult engine rebuilds, tricky diagnostic puzzles. Derek started asking him for help with particularly stubborn wiring issues. Carmen let him assist on computer diagnostics. Pete taught him old-school tricks that weren't in any manual. And Louis started calling him the kid genius. Halfway through the second month, after Marco diagnosed a misfiring engine in under 5 minutes using nothing but his ears and a screwdriver. "Your old man taught you good," Louis said that day, clapping him on the shoulder. "Real good." Marco had just nodded, throat too tight to speak. School was going well too. His grades were perfect. Straight A's across the board. The material came easily to him, especially the technical stuff. Math and physics made sense in a way that social studies and English didn't, but he worked hard on those too. He had to maintain a B average to keep his scholarship promise. He aimed higher. Brennan visited the garage every few months. He'd walk through, dressed in a suit, checking on operations, talking to the mechanics. And he always stopped by Marco's bay. Always watched him work for a few minutes, always asked how school was going. "Straight A's, sir," Marco would say. And Brennan would nod, something like pride in his eyes, and clap him on the shoulder. "Keep it up." The seasons changed. Fall became winter. Winter became spring. Marco turned 15 in March. Louis and the other mechanics surprised him with a cake from the grocery store, sung happy birthday off-key, gave him shit about being a baby. Marco had actually laughed, for the first time in what felt like years. By summer, Marco had been at the garage for almost a year. He'd grown 2 inches. Filled out slightly, the constant hunger finally gone, replaced by regular meals and actual rest. He looked healthier, stronger, more confident. That summer, Brennan called him into the headquarters office. "You've been with us for a year," Brennan said, sitting behind his massive desk. "Louis tells me you're the best apprentice he's ever trained. Your school grades are perfect. You're on track to graduate a year early. I'm proud of you, Marco." Marco felt his chest swell. "Thank you, sir. I'm giving you a raise, $18 an hour, and I want you to start thinking about college, where you want to go, what you want to study. We'll visit some campuses in the fall, see what feels right." Marco nodded, overwhelmed. College. A year ago, he'd been sleeping in a storage unit. Now he was talking about college. "There's something else," Brennan said. He stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city. "I want you to start learning the business side of things. How dealerships operate, how we acquire inventory, manage staff, handle finances. I think you have potential beyond just being a mechanic. You're smart. You're driven. I see a future for you in this company if you want it." "I do," Marco said immediately. "I want it." Brennan turned and smiled. "Good, we'll start slow. One day a week you'll shadow me or one of my managers. Learn how the company actually runs. Sound good?" "Yes, sir, thank you." Time kept moving. Marco turned 16. Brennan taught him to drive in an old Camry, patient and calm through all of Marco's mistakes. When Marco passed his driver's test on the first try, Brennan bought him that used Honda Accord. Reliable, practical, perfect. Marco drove it everywhere, to school, to the garage, On weekends, he'd drive to the storage facility, the one where he'd lived for those 3 months. He'd sit in the parking lot, staring at Unit 127, reminding himself where he'd been, making sure he never forgot. High school graduation came when Marco was 17. He'd tested out of several classes, taken extra credits, pushed himself harder than anyone expected. He graduated valedictorian, standing on stage in a cap and gown that Brennan had paid for, looking out at an audience that included Brennan, Jennifer, Louis, Derek, Carmen, Pete, and about a dozen other people from the company who'd become his family. He gave a speech, talked about second chances, about people who see you when others don't, about the power of hard work and faith. He didn't mention the storage unit, didn't mention Vincent. Just thanked Brennan, thanked his teachers, thanked everyone who'd believed in him. When he walked off that stage, diploma in hand, he looked up at the sky and whispered, "We did it, Dad." That summer, Marco started taking college classes. Engineering at the State University, just like Brennan had promised. Full scholarship, tuition, and books covered. He commuted from his apartment, still worked at the garage on weekends, still shadowed managers 1 day a week. The workload was brutal. College-level engineering, advanced mathematics, physics, chemistry, all while working 20 hours a week and learning business operations. But Marco thrived. He loved the challenge. Loved the way everything connected. The theoretical knowledge from school applied to the practical work at the garage. The business lessons from Brennan informed how he thought about efficiency and customer service. By the time he turned 18, Marco had completed 2 years of college coursework. He was on track to graduate with his bachelor's degree at 20, and Brennan, seeing his progress, his dedication, his growth, promoted him, lead mechanic, South Side Garage. The youngest in company history, Brennan made the announcement in front of the entire staff at the garage, handed Marco a plaque. Told everyone the story of the kid who'd fixed a Ferrari in under a minute and earned his future. People clapped, people cheered. Louis had tears in his eyes. And Marco, standing there in his clean work uniform, his hands still scarred and calloused but his future secure, felt like he'd finally arrived somewhere. Like he'd finally become the thing his father had always said he would be, something real. On his 18th birthday, Brennan took him to the secure garage where the Ferrari had been stored for 4 years. Marco had visited it occasionally, always with supervision, always just to look. To remember, but this time when Brennan handed him the keys, he didn't say anything about waiting, he just smiled. "She's yours, Marco, for real this time. You've earned her 100 times over." Marco took the keys. His hands were shaking the same way they'd shaken in that parking lot 4 years ago, but this time it wasn't from hunger or fear. It was from joy, from gratitude, from the sheer overwhelming reality of it all. He walked to the car, ran his fingers along the hood, feeling the smoothness of the paint, the coolness of the metal. Opened the door, slid into the driver's seat. The leather was still perfect, still soft. He adjusted the seat, put the key in the ignition, and started the engine. The sound was exactly as he remembered, deep, powerful, alive, a roar that said, "You made it, you're here, you did it." Tears streamed down his face as he drove it out of the garage. Brennan followed in his own car, and they drove through the city together. Past the cafe where it had all started. Meridian, still there, still full of people who'd never know what had happened in that parking lot. Past the storage facility where Marco had slept on concrete, where he'd wondered if he'd survive. Past Rodriguez Auto Repair, the garage where his father had worked, now closed, a for lease sign in the window. Marco stopped there for a moment, put the Ferrari in park, stared at the building. And he could have sworn he felt his father there with him, hand on his shoulder, voice in his ear saying, "I'm so proud of you, kiddo. So damn proud." They drove to an overlook on the edge of the city, where the skyline glowed against the darkening sky. Brennan got out of his car and walked over. Marco was still sitting in the Ferrari, engine off now, hands on the steering wheel, staring out at the lights. "You okay?" Brennan asked. Marco nodded. "Yeah. I wish he could see this." Brennan leaned against the Ferrari, arms crossed. "He can." Marco looked up at him. "Your father taught you everything that matters," Brennan said quietly. "The skills, the work ethic, the character, the integrity, everything you've accomplished, you built on the foundation he gave you. He's in every engine you've fixed, every problem you've solved." Every person you've helped. He's here, Marco. He's always been here. Marco wiped his eyes. Thank you for everything, for seeing me, for giving me a chance. For you earned it, Brennan interrupted firmly. Every bit of it. I gave you an opportunity. You did the work. Don't ever forget that. This isn't charity. This is you earning your place in the world. They stood there for a while, neither of them saying anything, just looking out at the city. Then Brennan clapped Marco on the shoulder one last time and walked back to his car. Marco watched him drive away, then got back into the Ferrari, started the engine, and drove home to his apartment. 3 years later, Marco graduated from college with a degree in mechanical engineering. He was 21 years old, top of his class, job offers from multiple companies. But he didn't take any of them. He stayed with Brennan. Brennan promoted him to regional manager, overseeing 5 garages across the south side. Marco was the youngest regional manager in the company's history, but nobody questioned it. He'd proven himself over and over. The mechanics respected him. The customers trusted him. And he had Brennan's complete confidence. But Marco never forgot where he came from. Never forgot the storage unit, the hunger, the fear, the moment when everything could have gone wrong. He started a nonprofit, Second Chance Automotive, a program for kids like him, kids who'd lost parents, kids who were sleeping in cars, in shelters, in storage units. Kids who had talent but no opportunity, potential but no path forward. He partnered with Brennan, with other shop owners across the city, with schools and community organizations. They trained kids. Gave them apprenticeships, gave them jobs, gave them hope, and every kid who came through the program got the same speech Marco had gotten from Brennan. This isn't charity, this is an investment. In you, and I expect a return on that investment. Most of them delivered. By the time Marco was 25, Second Chance Automotive had placed over 200 kids in jobs across the state. Some became mechanics, some became engineers, some started their own businesses. And all of them carried forward the lesson Marco had learned in that parking lot. That your worth isn't determined by where you come from, but by what you do when someone gives you a chance. Vincent Cross had disappeared from the industry years ago. Rumors said he'd sold his dealership at a loss, moved to another state, tried to start over. Some said he'd gone bankrupt. Others said he'd just faded away, his name becoming a cautionary tale in business circles. A reminder of what happened when you underestimated people, when you confused cruelty with power. Marco thought about him sometimes, wondered if he ever regretted it. Wondered if he ever realized that the moment he tried to humiliate a poor kid in a parking lot had been the first domino in his own downfall. Probably not. People like Vincent rarely saw their own mistakes. They just moved on, found someone else to mock, someone else to hurt. But Marco had moved on too, in a completely different direction. He still drove the Ferrari sometimes. On Sundays, usually when the roads were empty and the sky was clear. He'd take it out to that overlook where Brennan had taken him that first night, and he'd sit there, engine off, windows down, listening to the city breathe. And he'd think about his father. About the lessons, about the love. About the way life could break you down to nothing, and then, if you were lucky, if you worked hard enough, if someone saw you, build you back up into something stronger than you ever imagined possible. There's something you need to understand about moments like the one Marco lived through. They don't happen because the world is fair. The world isn't fair. It's not designed to be. The world is brutal and cold and indifferent. It will chew you up and spit you out and never think twice. It will take everything from you and give nothing back. But moments like Marco's happen because people choose to see you when everyone else is looking away. Because people choose to believe in you when the odds say they shouldn't. Because people choose to invest in you when logic says it's a waste. Brennan didn't save Marco out of pity. He saw value. He saw skill. He saw work ethic and determination and potential. He saw someone worth the risk. And that's the crucial difference between charity and opportunity. Charity makes you feel small, like you're being done a favor you can never repay, like you owe a debt that defines you. Opportunity makes you rise. It says, I see what you can become, and I'm willing to bet on it. Now prove me right. If you've ever been the one standing in that parking lot with duct tape on your shoes and grease on your hands, waiting for someone to give you a chance, this story is for you. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, dismissed because of where you came from or what you looked like or how much money you didn't have in your pocket. This is for you. The world is absolutely full of Vincent Crosses. People who will mock you, test you, try to humiliate you for sport. People who see you as entertainment, as a punchline, as something less than human. People who wield their power like a weapon meant to break you. But the world is also full of people like Brennan. People who will stop and watch. People who will recognize the work you're willing to do when no one else is paying attention. People who will step in, not because they have to, not because they're required to, not because it benefits them directly, but because they see something in you that you might not even see in yourself yet. A spark, a possibility, a future worth investing in. Your worth is not determined by the people who laugh at you. It's not determined by the people who ignore you or dismiss you or tell you you're not good enough, that you'll never amount to anything, that you should just give up now. Your worth is determined by what you do when they're laughing, by the work you put in when no one's watching, by the way you show up day after day, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when every part of you wants to quit and walk away. Marco didn't beg Vincent for that car. He didn't argue about fairness or justice. He didn't try to convince anyone he deserved it or that the challenge was rigged. He just fixed it. He did the work. And the work spoke louder than anything Vincent could ever say. Louder than the laughter, louder than the mockery, louder than the doubt and the dismissal and the cruelty. The work always speaks. Always, it's the one language that everyone understands, the one currency that holds value everywhere. You can fake a lot of things in this world. You can fake confidence, credentials, connections. But you can't fake good work. When you fix that engine, when you solve that problem, when you deliver that result, that speaks for itself. That creates its own authority. That demands its own respect. So if you're in your own parking lot right now, facing your own Ferrari, your own impossible test designed to make you fail, don't walk away. Don't let the Vincent Crosses of the world convince you that you're not good enough. Don't let the laughter drown out the voice in your head that says you can do this. Pick up your tools. Put your head down and do the work. Do it quietly. Do it with focus. Do it with everything your father or your mother or your mentor or your own stubborn heart taught you. Let the work speak for you. Let it prove what you already know but can't always say, that you're worth more than they think, that you're capable of more than they imagine, that you belong in spaces they'd rather keep you out of. Because somewhere, someone is watching. Maybe it's a person like Brennan, someone with power and resources who's waiting to see if you're the real thing. Maybe it's someone you haven't met yet, someone whose life you'll change the way Brennan changed Marco's. Maybe it's just the universe itself, keeping score, waiting to see if you're going to quit or if you're going to keep going even when quitting would be easier. And when the moment comes, and it will come if you keep working, if you keep showing up, if you keep proving yourself, when the truth becomes undeniable and the work has spoken louder than any doubt or criticism ever could. The people who tried to break you will have no choice but to step aside. And you'll drive forward, not because they decided to let you, not because they finally recognized your worth, but because you earned it, because you proved it beyond any shadow of doubt. Because you did the work when it mattered most, and the work created its own path, its own momentum, its own unstoppable force. Marco drives that Ferrari every Sunday. And every time he does, he thinks about his father. He thinks about the storage unit and the cold nights and the hunger that never quite went away. He thinks about Vincent's face when the engine started, the shock and confusion giving way to rage. He thinks about Brennan's hand on his shoulder, steady and real. And he thinks about every kid who's come through Second Chance Automotive, every kid who's been given a shot, every kid who's taken that shot and run with it, creating their own futures from nothing but opportunity and work. Because that's what this is really about. Not the car, though the car is beautiful and powerful and a symbol of everything Marco overcame. Not the money, though financial security means he'll never sleep on concrete again. Not even the revenge, or the vindication, or the public humiliation of a man who absolutely deserved it. It's about the fact that one moment of recognition, one moment of someone truly seeing you for who you are and what you're capable of becoming, can change absolutely everything. It can redirect the entire course of a life. It can take someone from sleeping in a storage unit to running 5 garages to changing the lives of hundreds of other kids who just need someone to believe in them. It changed everything for Marco. And it can change everything for you too. You just have to be ready when your moment comes. You just have to be willing to do the work, even when it's hard, even when the odds are against you, even when everyone's laughing and no one believes you can do it. Do the work anyway. Let it speak. And trust that somewhere, someone is listening,